For only the third time in 50 years of independence, a sitting minister passes away. His life now remembered as one of service, compassion, and love of country. On the morning of Monday, September 25th, news of the sudden passing of Minister Obie Wilchombe sent shockwaves as news of his death flooded social media. News agencies began posting and broadcasting whatever information we could get our hands on, trying to help the public to understand and process the news of the death of a man who, by all accounts, seemed fine. The love affair with Obie Wilchombe began with the Bahamian public during his highly successful career as a journalist with the Broadcasting Corporation. In the mid-90s, he entered politics, first as a senator, PLP chairman, elected member of parliament, and minister of both tourism and, more recently, social services. This week, the condolences poured in from across the nation, political divide on his beloved Grand Bahama, which he represented in parliament from day one. Tonight, we pay tribute to Obie Wilchombe, a renowned journalist and an astute politician. We begin our discussion and reflections the other side of this break.
Loved people. He had a heart for people, very compassionate. Obie spoke from his heart.
President C.C. Campbell and radio announcer Derek Stubbs taking a moment to reflect on their fondest memories with the former veteran journalist.
He grew up on Epsom Road, Mayfield Park, and I on Nelson Road. He worked at ZNS news reporter, and I work at ZNS engineer.
We have lost the giant of a man, one of the most influential yet humble Bahamians.
And as condolences pour in, the one thing they could all agree on was Wilchombe's passion for helping people.
God bless him, God bless his life and his family. And I hope and I pray that he have found a resting place in the arms of Jesus.
Obie, I love you, and if you could only see the amount of people here who is grieving your passing.
Well, as news surfaced of the sudden death of Grand Bahama MP Obie Wilchombe Monday morning, crowds gathered outside the Rand Memorial Hospital and PLP headquarters. Those are just some of the many expressions of the Grand Bahama MP and Social Services Minister, expressions of grief and sympathy. Our show tonight is dedicated to the legacy and memory of Wilchombe. Obie Wilchombe became a household name in the Bahamas soon after he joined the Broadcasting Corporation and established himself as a world-class broadcast journalist, eventually leading the newsroom at a critical time in the development of broadcasting in the country. Two of the individuals who benefited from his tutelage are my guests for this portion of our show. Dr. Yvette Stewart, now the program coordinator, the Department of Journalism and Communications at the University of the Bahamas, began her career at ZNS. She's joined by another ZNS colleague who also launched her career there, veteran broadcaster Michelle Malcolm. Ladies, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you.
I am honored to be in the presence of such greatness in the studio. We all share a very common legacy within the Broadcasting Corporation, and all at one time have sat at the anchor's desk.
Yes.
And so it's a privilege for me to have you here today. I just wish it was under better circumstances, but nonetheless. I want to begin, though, by asking you your individual reactions when you heard the news on Monday.
Well, Jerome, it was shock. It was basically a shock for me. That's the only word that comes to mind, a shock. I really couldn't believe it. They woke me up that morning with the news, And even then, we were hoping that it was just rumors because nothing had been confirmed at that time. But it was a shock, and even while we were talking on the phone, then word came that yes, it was indeed true.
Michelle?
Absolute shock. I mean, especially because over the past several weeks, I was working so closely with him. I had been contracted to do some work with the Department of Social Services for the 13 WAM conference, and I was working very, very closely with him over the past several weeks. And there was one evening just after the conference that he, myself, and Debbie Bartlett, he invited us to, Shanique Miller was there also, invited us to his office. And Obie kept us in that office until midnight, reminiscing, joking, talking about the good old days in ZNS and some of the things that he wanted to do and see in broadcasting. We were there literally until midnight. And so when I woke up and I saw in my phone this message that he was found unresponsive, it wasn't from a legitimate news source. So I'm thinking, here we go again, because you know how baby people go, right?
They will bury you several times.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, okay,
Right.
this is not real, because I searched our news, I didn't see anything. I searched other news agencies, I didn't see anything. So I'm thinking this is just a rumor. And I decided to call Debbie Bartlett, because Debbie has been working now with social services as a consultant for quite some, past several months. So I called her, and she answered the phone, and she said, "Michelle, he's dead." That's how she answered the phone. And I said, "What?" She said, "He's gone." I said, "Are you serious? You serious?" She said, "Michelle, he's dead." Numb. I couldn't believe it, because Obie looked fine. He didn't, there was no indication of him having any kind of, and he's had his health issues in the past, but he was so vibrant and excited about the future and full of life, and to go from that yesterday to today he's gone, that thing hit me like a ton of bricks. Just utter disbelief.
The fragility of life, eh? And just how quickly things happen. I want to use this opportunity to reminisce a bit and to talk about how it is that you all came to work with Obie. Yvette, I'm going to start. Dr. Stewart, I'd like to start with you.
Well, actually, I was hired under Mike Smith. So I worked with Mike Smith for a while, and then, of course, things turned over to Ed Bethel. And eventually, Obie Wilchombe was made news director. And of course, I sat under him as an editor. And so that was...
What was it like working with him?
Obie was a very demanding boss. And I guess I should, I think I learned that from him, actually.
Some of your students are probably going,
that's where it comes from.
Now it makes sense.
But a very demanding boss. I guess he wanted to just push you so that you would even know what you were capable of doing. I remember one time there was a major funeral, and I was one of the hosts, if not the main host of that funeral. And, at the time, I was also the main television news anchor. And he was like, well, after the funeral, we're going to go straight to you to anchor the news. And I'm like, huh? This was the time when we didn't really have a research department. It wasn't like we had people writing scripts for us and doing things for us. So I was in the field trying to get extra information for this funeral. So I'm out from morning, running around, going to the graveside, checking, because, when you're doing something live, there's a lot of time to fill. And so I was doing all of this, and then he's going to tell me I have to anchor news also, no break. I was like, no, Obie, that's not going to work. And eventually I won that one. So, yeah, that's the type of boss he was. I think, like I said, he always wanted to just push you, just to let you see how much you can do.
Michelle, tell us how it is that you came to work under an Obie Wilchombe.
Well, I was hired by Ed Bethel, and not long after, Obie was apparently off to school at UWI, and not long after he returned home and he became news director. So even though I was hired by Ed, most of my career at ZNS was with Obie as my boss. Yvette hit the nail on the head. He was tough. He was demanding. He expected excellence, and sometimes I used to say to him, you know, I can't squeeze blood out of a stone. You know, he just expected you to produce at that level all the time. And I used to think sometimes, this man head ain't good. Like, I expect you to pull this off, you know? But no excuses. Get it done, you know? And sometimes I thought he was unfair in his demands. But hindsight is 20/20. And you look back and you see how the way he treated us helped to develop us, helped to sharpen our skills. Mm-hmm. So I consider myself to be a pretty decent writer, a lot in part because of being under Obie Wilchombe. Because every time you would write a script for news and take it to him, and he look it over and ball it up and throw it back in your face and tell you, go do it again. And one thing with me, he never used to tell me why. So I'm like, okay, maybe if you told me what was wrong with it, no, go figure it out, do it again. And there would be times that I would write a script 4, 5, 6 times before I finally got it right. And at the time, I'm thinking, this man is a sadist. He's just, but it taught you how to write.
He obviously had a desire to build broadcast journalism in this country. What do you think motivated that for him?
I guess his training, when you consider who he would have worked under. And not only that, he spent a lot of time with Sir Lyndon.
Yeah.
And one of the things about Obie, he was well-read, he was always studying, he was always prepared. And so even though he was demanding, it wasn't like he wasn't doing what he expected from you.
This is true.
So he was leading by example, and so it was always this spirit of excellence, you know. And again, I'm the same way, so.
Michelle, you worked under him, and so did you, Yvette, during the 80s, which I consider to be one of the greatest decades in history. But even in this country, it was such a tumultuous, interesting time.
Yeah.
You know, we had so much going on in country. What were those days like working in a newsroom led by Obie?
Long hours. Long hours. Obie believed in you being on time for when your shift start. But he ain't got nothing to do with when it ends. Right?
Let's leave it at that.
No, he ain't worried about when it ends. So you need to be on time. Shift start 9 o'clock, and you know, I challenged when it comes to that area. So many times I was disciplined by him for being late, right? You gotta be on time. But oftentimes you ain't leaving work till 3 in the morning, depending on what is going on at the time. And his attitude used to be, your shift ends when the story is done. So don't come to me talking about when you work 9 to 5, not in this newsroom. You get off when your story is done.
Yvette, how did that help to build you? I mean, you, as a youngster, you were the face of ZNS News during a lot of my years. And I remember, you know, I watched it develop. I watched the news grow. But what was it like for you, and what did those days do to really help to develop you?
Well, as Michelle said, you know, we would spend a lot of time in the newsroom, and sometimes we were there from, you know, very early in the morning until late at night. The good thing about it was that during that time, we had like a family atmosphere. And so that was the good thing about it. We had a lot of arguments, okay, because, you know, you heard what Michelle said, you know. Another good thing about Obie was that we could argue with him even though he was our boss. But, you know, when the argument was over, it was over.
Right.
And we went back to what we had to do. And so, you know, all of this made us who we were in the newsroom.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, on Monday, the country lost a giant of a journalist and a politician. When we come back, more reflections on what his career as a journalist was like, and later how he began that transition into politics. Stay with us. This is On the Record. To the Bahamas today, Obie Wilchombe represents a dwindling generation of politicians. His entrance into politics was facilitated by the late Sir Lyndon Pinling, but his career in public life began as a broadcaster extraordinaire. Here's just a snapshot of his legacy in this field.
The former journalist started in the news industry back in 1975 when he joined the Broadcasting Corporation and was assigned to cover then Prime Minister Sir Lyndon Pinling, covering many local and regional events. While at ZNS, he served as Deputy News Director, and Assistant General Manager. In 1999, he began hosting the radio show The Bahamas Today on More 94 FM. A year later, he was sentenced to 4 days for refusing to reveal where he got a suicide note, which he read live on air. The note alleged to have been written by convicted murderer John Higgs Jr.
Well, my guests are two former colleagues who were once a part of what some call the golden era of ZNS, Dr. Yvette Stewart and Michelle Malcolm. We are discussing, of course, the legacy of a fallen colleague in Obie Wilchombe. Under his leadership at ZNS, how did he manage to really change the landscape of broadcasting?
Obie had a way about him. I used to tease him and say, my nickname for him was Master Manipulator. Because his way was, he would never come into the newsroom and dictate what was supposed to be done, right? I am sure he probably got his directives. Never once would he come into the newsroom and say, you have to do this. He would come in there and he would start this dialogue. Let's say he wanted a story done on this cup. He would say, let's talk about this cup for a second. And then the whole newsroom would engage in this big discussion about the cup, and we would look at the pros and cons of the cup, etc. And then he would say, maybe you should do a story on that. That was his way. So he swing you into believing that's your idea. Right? But he helped us to understand that our role was that we were modern-day history tellers. Mm-hmm. He always told us to look at ourselves as historians. You are the ones who are the gatekeepers. You are the ones who are preserving the history of the Bahamas. So if you see yourself in that role, then you'll understand how important it is, the work that you're doing. And his demand was that we approach our work with that level of seriousness.
Dr. Stewart, even then, political detractors accused him of political bias. Mm-hmm. What was your experience with dealing with that?
Well, people would say that, we worked there, we worked at the Broadcasting Corporation, so people assumed that if you had got a job at the Broadcasting Corporation, that somehow you were connected with the Progressive Liberal Party. But I'll tell you a story. Even with the 1992 general elections, and this was when Obie was at the time in charge of news. I was then the news director. And one thing we did in planning to cover that election was that we sat down as an editorial board and we made sure to give directives that if both parties were having events on the same day, we were to make sure that both of the stories aired the same time and as closely as possible that, they both got the same time.
Equal time.
Of course, you couldn't, pinpoint it by the second, but basically equal time. And I'll tell you the joke. After the Progressive Liberal Party lost the general elections, word came back that some of the Progressive Liberal Party members were accusing Obie Wilchombe and me of losing the election for the PLP because we had been so fair in our coverage.
That's interesting. I mean, I've heard some crazy things when it comes to what people say about you at ZNS. We've all lived through that. But and it's interesting you brought up 1992 because that election really then eventually led to him leaving, yourself included.
Yes.
At the time, he claimed political victimization. Take us back to that moment and what that was like for him to have to make that decision to leave a career that he loved so much.
Well, you know, there were several of us who would have left along with him. And what had happened, you know, I was asked by several other stations to give our side of the story, but not stations at the time, but newspaper outlets. And at the time I was like, you know, I didn't want to be, you know, to do that because, you know, you got the impression that no matter what you would have said, that it would have been, you know, politically written. And so we never really shared our stories. But what had happened, some of the things that led to that, and at the outset, I want to say that sometimes I don't think that party leaders know what is going on. So I'm not going to say that Mr. Ingram would have given any directives, but you know, some zealous party supporters do things. So what had happened, employees were coming. I remember specifically one came to me in tears, saying that there were F&Ms calling the station and saying that, you know, you're going to lose your job and, you know, we're going to fire you and blah, blah, blah. And another thing that was disheartening was that people, with the stance that the F&M took, you know, one of their main campaign issues was private broadcasting.
Right.
And, you know, they had continuously argued about being treated unfairly.
Sure.
And so people thought that once they got into power, things were going to change. So another personal example I had was on the very night of the opening of Parliament. Somebody came to me, oh, Yvette, you know, we have this well-known politician who was asking that we change our stories. And I was like, what? And she was very upset. A reporter had answered the phone, and so I was like, you know, let me talk to them. And so I talked to the person, and they were like, that, you know, you need to change that story. And I'm like, this is like 9 o'clock in the night. We had been at ZNS from about 7 o'clock in the morning
when you're doing
preparing
opening of
for
Parliament.
the opening of Parliament.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Michelle already talked about the long hours, so it was like, no, this is what we thought the story was going to be, was supposed to be, and that was the story, so we're not going to change anything. And so, you know, it was kind of disheartening because at least from this particular politician, the same thing that they were accusing the PLP of doing,
they came and did worse. They came and did worse, Jerome.
Mm-hmm.
Obie had approached me to leave with the group. And I said to him, Obie, let me pray about it, let me think about it. And after prayer and reflection, I felt it wasn't time for me to go. And he said, Michelle, based on what I'm seeing, based on what I'm hearing, it's going to be rough here. I said, Obie, that may be the case, but it's not time for me to go. And so I didn't leave. Much of what he warned me was going to happen, happened. And the environment in that news department, I think because the Free National Movement at the time thought that exactly what I described in the newsroom was not happening. They probably thought that he would come in there and just give us directives. It never happened. And so when they got into power, they figured, oh, it's our time now. And they would literally call you and harass you and say, this is what's going to happen. And I will tell you the worst case of it. When they did decide to leave, I'm the anchor at the time. Mm-hmm. I write my story. We didn't have electronic teleprompters. It was, you had to type it out, and they had to physically put it through the machine. And so a young man who wasn't even news director at the time, who obviously they had earmarked to become news director, but at the time he was the sportscaster, he comes to me and he says, "This is the script you're going to read." Excuse me? You can't be talking to me. I've written my script. And my script was balanced. By then we did the news live with the physical script. He walks into the studio while we're reading live. A major F&M politician walks in there with him, and they're standing over me like this. And they're like, "You better read the script that we wrote." They actually wrote a script. I had my own script in front of me. They put their script in the teleprompter. And so as the boy is doing the manual rolling and their script came up, I looked down and I read my script. Because you ain't gonna tell me, especially you being a politician and you being a sportscaster, how to write for news. You don't have that right.
I think one day when the story of ZNS is really told, I think the public will be very surprised. And, you know, I just want to say for a point in history, that's when I entered.
Yeah.
Shortly after you all left. And I was hired with a new slate that came in. And I thank you for staying, because I am where I am today because of you. So I thank you that you had the wherewithal to stay. But back to the Obie discussion a bit now. This really helped, I think, to launch his political career, because it was shortly after that, Celinda then asked him to enter frontline politics and to become a senator. Did you all always know that he had political aspirations, or do you think this is something that came about?
He always had political aspirations.
Really?
He and I used to have a lot of back and forth discussions. And he would always say to me, "One day you're going to have to say the honorable to me." I say, "Don't hold your breath." And so when he actually won his seat, and I said, "Oh my God." And so when I saw him again, I said, "You're honorable." But he was always interested in politics.
Okay, good to know. We're just about out of time, Dr. Stewart. How will you remember Obie Wilchombe?
Oh, I will remember Obie in so many ways. Obie was, we haven't talked about some of the things that he did to make sure that the surroundings were were good for broadcasters. Given that we spent so much time there.
Your contemporaries talked about it all the time.
Yeah,
what he did to make it
Yes.
a great place to work.
Yes,
right.
it was.
So I will definitely remember that. I will remember him as a friend also. I didn't mention that I'd just seen him for the first time in a long time at the event that ZNS had on the Thursday. And it was, like I said, the first time I'd seen him in I think even a couple of years. And when I saw him, he just gave me this big hug. And it was like, okay, And it was, people look at things in hindsight. But right after that event, and I spoke to a mutual friend, I was like, I know I hadn't seen Obie in a little while, but it seems like it was more, I actually said this to them, that it was more than just a regular hug. Right. And next thing I know, days later, and he's gone.
Michelle, 30 seconds. How will you remember Obie Wilchombe?
So many different ways. Tough boss, friend, colleague, just, there was only one Obie, only one like him. And, I appreciate that he wasn't petty, that you could have the lively discussion with him, and the next day it's like nothing. I appreciate the fact that he was so hard on us, because it helped us to become better people and better journalists. And I appreciate that he made the atmosphere, family atmosphere that we worked in, and made it a fun place to be. Otherwise, working until 3 o'clock in the morning would have been real hard. But we didn't feel it, because we just had such a love and excitement for what we were doing, and he was a big part of that.
And as we wrap up, I have to say that this industry is where it is today because of Obie Wilchombe. I am where I am because of you, because of the knowledge that he was able to, and the training that he was able to impart. And Dr. Stewart, in your capacity now in the School of Journalism, you are turning out and helping to turn out a new generation of journalists. And so this country really owes him a debt of gratitude for this industry.
Yes.
And thank you all so much for coming.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Dr. Yvette Stewart, Michelle Malcolm, it has been a pleasure. I only wish it was under better circumstances, as I said at the beginning. Thanks again for coming. Obie Wilchombe left the bright lights of television journalism in the early 90s. It wasn't long, though, before he resurfaced, this time in frontline politics. When we come back, we explore the legacy of Obie as the astute politician. Stay with us. From the RTV studios, this is On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. When Obie Wilchombe arrived on the political scene, he stood on an already established public persona. But now he was a politician, handpicked by the man he admired politically. He was destined for political greatness. Here's a look at his political legacy.
1994 saw Wilchombe's entrance to politics when he was appointed a senator by former Prime Minister Pinling, and again in 1995 by PLP leader Perry Christie. In 2002, he defeated Free National Movement candidate David Wallace to win the West End and Bimini seat. The PLP won that election, and Wilchombe was appointed Minister of Tourism with responsibility for the Broadcasting Corporation. He was again appointed Tourism Minister in 2012. It was during that tenure when, among other things, the gaming industry was regularized.
I'm pleased today to bring to Parliament a new cutting-edge, comprehensive gaming bill, gaming regulations, and gaming house regulations.
He was also a part of the deal-making process for the Bahamart Resort. However, following the 2017 general election, Wilchombe lost his seat like many of his colleagues. Still, Wilchombe stayed loyal to his party and to his hat in the race for chairman at the PLP's 2019 convention.
I never once walked away from my party or ever considered leaving my party or not supporting my party.
In 2021, he returned to run again in his home in West End and Bimini with an overwhelming show of support.
The reality is I expect to win. They've asked us to get our people. They've asked us to show our support. We've asked us to be caretakers. They've asked us to do things in the party's interest. We've done it all.
Wilchombe went on to win that seat. He was recently made Minister of Social Services, Information and Broadcasting.
Well, my guests for this portion of the show are former members of Parliament and cabinet ministers. Loretta Butler Turner served as an MP and Minister of Social Services, and Danny Johnson is also a former MP and former Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture. Welcome to On the Record to both of you. I know that you've been here before, but welcome back. Let's start out first by talking about your reaction on Monday to the news that a colleague, a parliamentary colleague, and in some cases a friend, had passed away.
If I can begin, first of all, I can tell you, Monday I was preparing to do another show, and I was disconnected from my mobile. And when I walked outside, someone said to me, so you saw that Obie died. I said, excuse me, who Obie? It was denial. I was numb. It was so sudden because you're talking about someone who is so full of life, who's so energized. It was really a very numbing feeling. There was denial. And I could feel the heaviness once I started checking social media. The amount of people that probably felt the very same way that I did.
Danny, for you?
I'm the same. You know, Wilchombe and I became very close. He brought me on as a younger brother when I got into active politics. He and I share the same affinity to Sir Lyndon. It shows, first of all, condolences to the entire Bahamas on not the loss of a political figure or broadcaster, but of a real native son, and a son in that someone who shines bright, who stands for something, who represented something, and something important enough that it affected other people. That's the thing you want to stand for. That's the thing you want to represent. Something bigger than yourself. And so it reverberates the loss, the pain, the shock, the feeling of what? Obie, right? And whether people who know him, like him, didn't know him, didn't like him, you would feel the same way.
Absolutely, without question.
You just feel the same way.
It's had an effect. What kind of politician was Wilchombe?
I would say one of the best, a professional politician. So in this country, and Loretta and I were speaking off camera earlier, there are people who we don't do this well in the Bahamas. We don't separate government and politics very well. So politics is one thing, that is the heat of the battle, that's the playoffs. Then the championship comes and it's over. But the league still exists. You have to govern. There are 28 teams in the NFL or whatever. All of them have training camp next week. They have to open. Their schools that have to open. The people going to work. The coffee got to be there. The cups have to be there. The towels have to be there. The stadium have to open. And you there rowing over something that happened on Sunday. That ain't coming back. That over. We row too much in the Bahamas, and we forget how to govern. Wilchombe is a fellow, as a politician, and this is what we should learn from his life, is he could separate government, and he knew it well, and practice governing well, and politics, which is what we do in season in our party. They are two different things. That's what he could do.
I must agree. I must certainly agree with you. He was a consummate politician. And I was sharing off air many years ago when I think he was chair or co-chair of the PLP convention. And he was adamant that I speak at this convention, both he and Neville Wisdom. And I was like, you want me to speak at a PLP convention? I don't even subscribe to that, those philosophies. And his response was, so what? I didn't ask you that. I'd like for you to speak. And he was so convincing and so embracing that, he peels away the layers of differences and makes you find your commonality. I think that was one of his great strengths. Because even in our opposition to each other over the years, I could never say that Obie has ever had a harsh word toward me. Always very smiling, very engaging, always a gentleman.
And that's certainly my next question to you. What was it like for you being his political opponent in Parliament?
Well, one of the things is, our relationship did not start when we were in politics. I knew Obie at a very early age when he'd first come to New Providence and was at ZNS, because I had a sister that was also pursuing journalism at that time. So I was able to actually see him up close and personal as a young person. And then when I moved to Grand Bahama to establish our business there, of course, all of his family was there. So I became very close with his mom, his dad, his brothers, his siblings. And so I knew him in many, many dimensions. But politically, one thing about Obie is he always appreciated relationships. I buried his father, and I remember, he was always very open and engaging. So while I might have had great confrontations with the side opposite, after that is done, it's done. There was no animosity or anything like that. He would always still be very engaging. And I think that's the beauty of his personality and why he was able to be like a magnet for so many persons, whether you were on the PLP side or the F&M or any other side. He really, truly brought people together.
Danny, you served in the cabinet with him, certainly on a different level. What was it like working with him at that level?
Wilchombe and I had political magic, right? I was at Youth Sports and Culture with a budget of less than $5 million. He was at tourism with a budget of about $500 million.
Everything else. Everything.
So he had a bunch of stuff to do. He didn't have as much time. He'd call and say, Danny, this young guy, Buddy Heel, coming out of college, I don't know where he is. You got to go find him, go to New York, and da-da-da-da. I say, well, you got to tell me how to do that. He said, put it on your credit card when you come back. I'm going to cover it. Don't worry about it. Go. And I'd go up there, met Buddy Heel. I said, man, I know him. from Freeport. Same thing when the Johnson guy won the thing at Madison Square Garden. Say, man, someone have to be there from the Bahamas. This was his thing. He's like, when a Bahamian is out there in the world, we were talking about it earlier, said this is government at its best. Someone from our government must be there to represent the country and tell these people thanks on our behalf.
So he was
that
so
was our
connected.
political cabinet relationship. That
What was I mean, you hit it, you started to mention it, but what was his impact on tourism? Because he really was, to me, the ambassador of the Bahamas in so many ways. But, you know, from where you sat around that cabinet table, what was his impact?
Tourism is a marketing engine of the Bahamas, and you need a promoter, a marketeer. Wilchombe's smile, his presence, his style. When he come in, you will know. I mean, he puts on the show on behalf of the country. But he understood tourism. He understood all of the brand. He understood the mechanism, and then the impact to pass it on to people, because he had the decorum. And this is when we learn from his life. This, you know, beyond the sorrow, when you learn from the life of people like this, or just people generally, there's a lesson. And I really look at his decorum as it made the Bahamas seem different than other places because of him. So it was, you know, in the Bahamas, we don't have an army, we ain't got no air force, we ain't got all these brutal things for people. We got to be careful engaging. It was charm. The Bahamian people, we got to put the charm offensive on you. And you can change your mind, but whatever you was thinking when we finish with you. This is what she could do.
Loretta, my question to you really is, what in your mind made him such a beloved politician? Because you mentioned that he reached across the political divide. He knew when to end the election cycle, or he knew where the party ended and when government started. But what made him such a beloved politician? I mean, the outpouring has been tremendous since his passing on Monday.
To do things for people without publicity is so amazing. People who are in need, they do not want the world to know what help they have gotten.
Amen.
Obie was confidential in that regard. I know that I had to write him on several occasions to assist with certain individuals or certain things. It happened. He never talked about it. People will tell the story if they would want to have others know. And I think that confidentiality, he was like a confidant, and that makes persons even more valued and appreciated. So in terms of the outpouring that you see, in terms of what you hear people saying, you realize now that this man actually touched so many lives, but didn't get up and brag about it. Another thing, I think his humility. His humility is amazing, because many times we seek spotlight when we're in these positions. I looked at him in West End on Sunday evening, and you know, he's among his people, and he's just like them. And those are the lost memories that he created. That was his life. He was with his people.
Good place for us to take a break. This is our final break in the show. We have lots more to talk about. Stay with us. On the Record continues right after this.
He learned well from Sir Lyndon.
Yeah.
I raised it when I come.
Certainly have the best seat in the House tonight. This is On the Record. These are our final moments of our show as we honor Minister Obie Wilchombe, who passed away suddenly on Monday. From around the country, tributes poured in this week, honoring a man who represented West End and Bimini on 3 occasions.
Tributes continue to pour in following the shocking death of Social Services, Information and Broadcasting Minister Obie Wilchombe. Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association President Robert Sandy Sands describes Wilchombe as an extraordinary, compassionate nationalist.
He built on the foundation of tourism ministers before him. He laid additional foundations, certainly for the empowerment of Bahamians within the industry. He laid the fruit. It's now for the fruit to bear. and many people will benefit from that labor that he performed as tourism minister.
Now, in a statement, Nassau Paradise Island Promotion Board CEO Joy Juberlu said Wilchombe contributed bold and inventive ideas to the industry that left a lasting mark on the Bahamas and Nassau Paradise Island. She said he played a fundamental role in developing sports tourism and positioned the Bahamas as a premier sports tourism destination, which attracted several major sporting events to our shores and resulted in significant partnership. Meanwhile, San says he was caught off guard and is saddened by the news.
It teaches us all a lesson in terms of being prepared, because that is the one sure thing in this world that we must all go through. And it is never easy to comprehend. But there is a true saying, we know it not the day nor the hour. And so for most of us, while shock, I think it sends us a very strong lesson about how we live our lives and the contributions we make.
And what great contributions he made. Danny, let's talk about what made him so effective in government. We heard there in that clip the reference to sports tourism, and I know that you all worked very closely together on the development of sports tourism.
Boy, I would have to say Wilchombe gave me the idea and I ran with it. So sports in paradise is something that's been sitting around from we were young boys. He went to QC, I went to QC. We heard about it. I was sitting around the table, Sir Lyndon and Kendall Nottage and these people. They always talk about bringing the big things to the Bahamas. And Muhammad Ali came, the drama in the Bahamas, but they were episodic. We never had the industry begin to come to town. So he and I discussed what would the industry look like if we had a brand for people to populate and own. The government doesn't want to own this thing now. We put out the brand and other people come in to have ownership of it. And this is where you got to give him credit. Our sports in paradise implementation occurred. Plenty of people talked about it. We did it. And he did it really, really well.
He really was a student of Sir Lyndon.
Yeah.
He studied him. He emulated him from time to time. He knew him in and out. How did that impact his ability to do what he did so well?
Well, highly and brilliantly. The first thing we need to show Bahamians, in a successful life, you need a mentor. No matter how good you think you're going to get, find yourself a mentor. See if they will mentor you. I think Pindling took him on and mentored him. But then Wilchombe took on the passion to learn. He became a lifelong learner of this thing called politics. And it shows that he learned from the very best.
Interesting. Loretta, having served as Social Services Minister during your time in Cabinet, he was Social Services Minister up to the time of his death. You know the difficulties of the job of social services and of that portfolio. How would you describe the work that he's done within that ministry in the short 2 years that he has been responsible?
I have learned so much more over the past few days as to the impact that he actually had during his tenure at Social Services. You know, it's interesting that he served as Minister of Social Services because sometimes it's referred to as a soft ministry.
I was going to ask you about that.
Kidding?
Yes, I've heard that.
It's referred to as a soft ministry, but it is probably the most profound and integrated ministry that affects the entire governance of a country. Because when you look at the impact of the social makeup, the economic disadvantaged persons, the vulnerable, the homeless, and all of that, you begin to realize that unless there is great impact at that level, the most fundamental level of people's needs, then if you should fail there, you're probably placing your government as well in peril. So the stories that I have heard recounted by persons who were actually affected positively by Minister Obie Wilchombe in his capacity is amazing. And I think that speaks to the success that he has had, and not just in New Providence, around the family of violence. Additionally, when you look at the fact that he was also now probably the first male figurehead that represented encompassed in that is the Bureau of Gender Affairs. And he just completed a very successful international conference put on by the British, our British counterpart, the WAM conference, and the difficult legislation that he was about to deal with in terms of equality for women. I think that having a male figurehead lead that was really important, because the engagement of individuals on all levels, males and females, was going to be very important. And because of his passion, he was going to be able to drive that.
He never backed down from, or never shied away from, even some of the criticism that even his male counterparts had in Parliament for some of that legislation, some of the controversial legislation, as they saw. He never backed away from it.
He actually, whatever his assignment was, this is where you saw his professionalism in terms of politician. Whatever his assignment was, he pursued it with great passion. And you know, it was interesting when Daniel was talking about the sport brand in tourism. I remember back in the day when Obie would put on his, he played football.
Mm-hmm.
He played football, and they put on these, what are these
pads,
things? And
pads
on
and
the
jersey.
Eastern Parade.
Eastern Parade,
and,
yeah.
you know, he would play. So, you know, it was not, I don't think that it was by circumstance or by luck that he embraced sports tourism. He was a sports enthusiast. And so, you know, everything he did with great passion.
On the night he would have passed, the Dolphins were playing. He's a Dolphins fanatic.
Really?
His life is him and not. They live for the Dolphins, man. The Dolphins had maybe their greatest game ever since 1973. I could picture him might have jumped up and just fly off the planet.
At least he had that pleasure watching that.
Might have jumped up at the Dolphins win, but he had 70 points to 20. He jumped off and fly right off the planet. He was so happy.
That's
no
amazing
joke.
because he was a passion. He was impassioned, and he displayed great passion for whatever his job was.
Yeah.
He, in 2017, when others decided they didn't want to, sorry, not in 20, in this last election, 2021, when others moved off the scene and did not, you know, had taken a back seat after the loss, he continued to offer. He offered himself as one of few. What does that say about him? And others said, you know what, I'm done. I've had enough of this. He offered himself.
It is commitment to the cause, right? Commitment to the cause. And we have to be careful with our politics in the Bahamas. Our politics is just like a 100-meter dash. It's who can do it better. All the guys I've run against, I am very good friends with. But I'm going to try to beat you. We are competitive. But I have nothing against you. We're not petty and we're not personal. We need to have the best people come into the fore. That's all it is. And when it is done, you want to play fair and square. You know, we don't have these elections of great violence and fellas wouldn't give up the thing on election night. Once you see you get big man, you don't wait like some places around us where you have to wait for weeks and weeks and go to court and people don't call you to congratulate you.
We
never congratulates you. We call in like 15 minutes, say, man, like, yeah, boy, you did good, man.
Yeah, well
you
done.
know, by the way, you're buying breakfast next week because I in the bad shape.
But not only that,
Yeah.
Jerome, if I might intervene, as I recall, you know, that was a very difficult nomination for Obie to get because I think that, you know, once again, you know, for those of us that watch politics, you know, he was not the favored candidate.
No, he had to fight for that
He had to
nomination, yes.
literally fight for it, and he had to demonstrate. And I think in one of your news clips earlier, he brought his people with him to show his strength and his
political might.
Absolutely.
To get that nomination.
Absolutely.
I remember being very impressed by that.
And I tell you of the Brave Davis factor. In the old days, in Bahamian party politics, if you run against a leader and you lose, you're gone. I think you could speak to that too, right? If you were in Bahamian party politics, you run, you lose, and they try to annihilate you, blackball. They try to annihilate you. Wilchombe ran against Brave Davis. He wanted to be the leader of the PLP. That was his lifelong ambition. Brave Davis comes along. He wins at convention. And everyone's like, well, okay, well, now you should get rid of Wilchombe.
He stayed.
This is the Brave Davis effect.
That's
he
right.
did his nomination last. I'm sitting there at the table. He said, and everyone's like, no, you know, all the fellas who run against us, they're gone. And the Brave Davis effect said, no, that's not the way you run a country. And against almost everybody's opinion in that room, Brave says, you know how talented Obie is? You know how people respect his political acumen? You know, his strategy is good? I think he should have this nomination. You look at the lexicon of Bahamian politics.
No, it doesn't happen.
My father get fired. Frankie Wilson get fired. All of them fire. You get fired. Ingram get fired. Christie fire. Not no retire. Fire. You understand? Gone. Right?
Thrown away.
We're
Thrown.
just
Gone.
about out of time.
But
so
he stayed. And that's a legacy of, we got to learn that too, man. Stop trying to kapunkle up people just because they have a different view.
Agreed. Boy, what a better country we'd be, eh? That's a show for another day. His death now forces, though, a by-election. What does this mean for his party? Whenever a sitting party now has to face into a by-election, what does that mean for the political landscape?
Well, you know, in Bahamas, by-elections are almost a referendum. It's a test of your governance, real test, an honest test. The history of by-elections really interesting. Uriah McPhee, Shadrach Morris, we need to study. Nick Wilchombe was a student of political history. We don't have much people in Parliament now who know anything but our political history. I don't know what days we're talking about. I honestly don't. You have to study these by-elections to see their effect. Ryan Pinder, Elizabeth, you just study them. They often come midterm, and it's whether you're going to win again or not.
It really is a litmus test. Loretta, what are you having represented a family island constituency, what is that going to be like when you look at and you have the distinction of having represented both? What's different in that constituency that those voters are going to be looking for in the next candidate?
Well, first of all, I think they're going, because they've had such a very, very good member of parliament, they're going to be sizing up whoever the parties are sending to them. I do see the benefit to the PLP given the fact that Obie was, in fact, a well-loved, well-respected and regarded MP. Does that mean that the PLP will win again? If they send someone with that level of compassion, if they send someone that understands the dynamics of Family Island politics, they probably would have a very, very good chance. He has sown a lot of good seeds that the next person will be able to reap, and they are going to have to be very good. Other than that, when you talk about past by-elections, they will be like the young man in Abaco, voted out after 2 years. So that's when and you know, he came after Ingram.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, coming after Obie, you're going to have those sort of comparisons.
You have some big shoes to fill.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
people have to be ready for this. Family Islands are not easy. This is commitment. This is life-changing. To represent people, this is a life-changing event. And you have to give yourself fully to the service of these people. Fully. That's why I admire Sir Lyndon, my old man, and Wilchombe. They fellas give their life to these people.
It's not a show-up situation.
They're not. And if win, lose, or draw, they're still with you.
Good stuff. Good way to end. Loretta Butler-Turner, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure. Always wish we had more time, and certainly wish it was under better circumstances. Patty, my good doctor, it's good to see you.
I would like to thank you, but before I close, I'd also like to extend sympathy to you on the passing of your dear father.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I do
Same
appreciate
condolences from us and our family.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Always great guests. Anytime. Next time we need like an hour and a half to talk, eh? You think? All right. Folks, thank you very much. It's certainly been my pleasure, although I would have preferred we spoke under better conditions. It was good having you. I appreciate you making the time. That's going to do it for this edition of On the Record tonight. Thank you again to all of my guests. See you next time right here on The Record.